All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Hope everyone's been enjoying this fall weather. I know I am. I love being in my sweaters. Not looking forward to the rain tomorrow, however. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Today's webinar, we are in the last part of a 4-part Shields Up cybersecurity series. So just as a recap, we had kicked it off with an expert panel discussion. Then we jumped into cybersecurity in the cloud. If you joined us last week, we talked about cyber hygiene and some low-cost best practices and tools. We did talk a little bit about email, but today we're going to do a much deeper dive into that. Really quickly, if you have not seen the last webinars, there are links to the recording so that you can view it if you'd like, and this deck will be shared with you. Really quickly, housekeeping details. This webinar is also being recorded and will be uploaded to our website, usually by the end of the day today, but definitely by the end of the day tomorrow. One of the perks of attending our webinars live is that you get a follow-up email from me that will also include the slide deck and any resources that we talk about today. Chat box is available for you to use, and people are already dropping names and what organization you're with. If you haven't already, please do so. You can also use that chat box to make any questions or comments. And closed captioning is also available. So for those of you who are not familiar with Aparo, we are a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits in all things technology. So our motto is that we connect the nonprofits with skilled volunteers to help meet their needs. Our services fall under 3 buckets: advice, education, and solutions. Most of our nonprofits, they start here under advice. They get connected with the tech therapist, talk about a technology need, get coaching, guidance. Just a great way to start out and see what the best next steps for you are. Under education, we offer team trainings, workshops, and these webinars, and solutions are our larger projects. So the more popular projects include finding a donor management system, LMS, CRMs, so that would fall under our solutions. I do want to mention also our team training opportunity. So we have volunteers who are ready to give your nonprofit a tailored and customized security awareness training. So we will first sit down with you, talk over where your nonprofit is at, where your end user knowledge is at, and we will customize a training for you. So this is a great opportunity. Please take advantage of it. You just need to reach out to me and I'd be happy to get you all started. And then finally, these are ways to get connected with Aparo if you aren't already. You can visit our website, aparo.org/nonprofits. You can also subscribe to our email list to stay updated on our events, or you can email me directly. That is it for me. I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Tim Saunders from Blue Line Technologies to lead our conversation today. Tim?
Awesome. Thank you very much. So welcome in everybody. Hopefully you can now see that screen share coming through.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, so good morning, good afternoon. My name is Tim Saunders. I'm a cybersecurity professional at Blue Line Technologies, and I have the privilege of spending a little bit of time with you this afternoon to kind of talk about specifically, we're going to look at business email compromise, but we're also going to look at some of the cyber threats, the cyber landscape that we're dealing with today, and potentially the threats of tomorrow. So we're very grateful for this partnership with Aparo and being a part of this. It's awesome what they're doing, their mission. So we're very glad to be here with you today, and hopefully you'll be able to take something away. We will have some time at the end for questions and answers, so feel free to jot a little note down along the way if you think of something, and we'll be sure to get to you at the end. So let's dive in. This is my stack of stats. You don't need to memorize anything. It might be overwhelming, but we're going to go through just one piece at a time. I do think it's important information to kind of set the foundation for what we're talking about today. So ransomware, which is often used by criminals to lock files, prevent access to certain systems or documents, attackers decided that inflation hit them too. And collectively, we actually saw payment demands rise almost 43% year over year. So these demands often come with this loose guarantee if paid, they're going to return the data to you. And the average ransomware payment in 2021 was just shy of $250,000. And we'll get a little further later into ransomware and payments and the legality and all that. But for now, just know that it's a lot of money. And obviously, we're seeing those demands increase each year. In 2021, cyber attack occurred every 11 seconds, and we're absolutely on pace to probably cut that time nearly in half this year, which seems to be a fairly common trend. In 2020, it was actually about 30 seconds, so we had a pretty significant increase throughout 2021. Last year, over 20 billion, and yes, that is with a B, billion, was paid in data, equipment, or file ransoms. Tons of money there. And targeted attacks are now more prevalent than the old spray and pray method. For those that may not be familiar, spray and pray essentially banked on mass campaigns, trying to yield benefits for the attackers. And today we find instead they're very targeted. They're looking at specific people, specific businesses, and they're spending their time doing the research before they attack. So a little more convincing attacks today than they used to be. We also saw an increase of about 17% in the number of data breaches just year over year in general. And Americans aged 60 and older were affected by cybercrime at a much higher rate than any other age range. Business email compromise, which is kind of the primary topic of today, where an email account is taken over by a bad actor, remains near at the top of the list for reported business cyber incidences. And in addition, about 42% of the time, business email compromise resulted in a financial loss for that organization. Lastly, I know you're ready to move forward with the stack of stats. 61% of breaches involved credentials. Often these were stolen, maybe unknowingly or accidentally given by the account owner. Sometimes they were cracked by the attackers, and this could be due to potentially poor password hygiene, essentially using password 123, or maybe your favorite color or sports team, something that's pretty easy for an attacker to guess. So, purpose of this, let's talk about business email compromise. I'm very passionate about cybersecurity in general. That's my background. And so for me, this is something that I don't think a lot of people really have a grasp of. It's not really well known, the term. And that's what BEC stands for, business email compromise. It's also sometimes referred to as email account compromise. So you'll see oftentimes with the FBI, which we'll look at in a little bit, they produce a list each year of all the different incidences that they deal with. And sometimes you'll see business email compromise and email account compromise together. They're essentially the same. One is business, one is usually residential or personal. So what we do know is that the FBI did consider the financially most damaging of all crimes was business email compromise for last year. And I expect it will probably be the same this year when those numbers come through, which is usually in the beginning of the following year. So sometime in 2023, we'll know for sure, but I'm pretty confident in that. So attackers will target both individuals and businesses, small and large alike. We used to see they were very targeted towards large businesses. We don't see that anymore. They're targeting small businesses as well. And we've actually tipped the scales last year. We no longer see more attacks going towards large businesses. They're actually now more attacks are going towards the small businesses. So definitely keep that in mind if you're a small business owner, mid-sized business. There are targets on you now, so you definitely want to make sure you are staying up to date with your cybersecurity as well. Last year, almost 2 billion was lost because of this and business email compromise, and we're certainly on pace to break that again. So I would expect this year, 2022, will probably be around the 3 billion loss mark for business email compromise. So again, just an astounding amount of money there. So definitely something to keep your eye on. You don't have to memorize any of this. This is just the FBI's list that they release. And again, this just kind of goes through some of the losses, different incidences that they report, and I'm sure you'll recognize some of the big ones like identity theft, credit card fraud, and those things that you probably hear about in the news, ransomware. You probably remember things like Colonial Pipeline, JBS Foods, Kia Motor, some of those other big ones that made the news. And there's a ton more that didn't. And obviously this list kind of speaks to that. These big dollar amounts that didn't just come from a couple of companies, they came from hundreds, if not thousands of them. So how does business email compromise happen? It's scary, but what actually happens? So the first thing that we see is the attacker is going to identify a target. This can be done through use of social media. It could be information gathering from maybe things that are listed on your company's website, usually the About Us page. It could be from a business media or blog posting, or it could actually come from leaked information, and that may not be something that you could have prevented, possibly from a previous breach or from a partner breach, which is something we often see as well. That's step two. The attacker is going to groom the target. They're going to do this by sending very highly personalized messages. We call this spear phishing, because phishing is throwing your line out, see who bites. Spear phishing is very intentional, though. We're targeting something, a specific fish, and then we're going to spear it. So now that you know a little bit about phishing in the cyber world, it's quite similar. So again, the intent of that attacker is to gain the trust of the target, and that's usually through use of emails, but it could also come through phone calls, it could come through text messages, and they're going to try to persuade or pressure a person into taking some sort of action. That could be downloading a file, clicking on a link, or it could even be providing just some little innocent piece of information. At least that's the way that it seems. In that step three, the attacker now has detailed information about an ongoing transaction or a future transaction that's occurring within the company. They could also now potentially have access into an email mailbox. And through that, they could also potentially plant malware on a computer if they've compromised a device as well. And usually what we're seeing is they're compromising email passwords. So hence the business email compromise, the email account has become compromised in some way. And there's kind of that overflow where other things may be impacted, but generally that's where it begins. With this new access, they're going to finalize their plan, and they're going to coordinate with the target or secondary target. That could be anything from adjusting a wire transfer, could be changing payroll information or where checks are delivered to. And we see other usually financially incentivized actions from those attackers as well. That's step four. That's when the transaction or transfer occurs. So the attacker runs off into the night with your money. You probably never hear from them again. Unless they come back and maybe try to trick you again. So hopefully, once something like this has occurred, you've taken corrective actions, your technology teams, your partners have come in, prevented or removed anything that may have been left behind. And hopefully you don't get to this point at all, but if you do, remediation is a really important step and one that we take very seriously, because that information that the attacker gains, whether it's password, whether they plant malware on a computer, they're going to try to use that again if it's not cleaned up. So you really want to make sure once you are breached in some way or have some issue that you take corrective actions and really be thorough with those. So I want to show you an example here. This is a business email compromise kind of in a flow chart, and it can go in a lot of different directions. So there's no one set in stone action that's going to occur, but this is just a possible scenario. Cyber criminals are really quite creative. And in this example, they didn't actually exploit the first target. So what they did is they compromised the first person through a business email compromise. They took control over that account, and then they used that person's account to send out messages to secondary targets, usually people that person communicates with. And again, they're not picking random people. They're usually going after your financial people, your accounts receivable, accounts payable, your HR, your business managers. They know who to go after and who has authorization to make transfers of some kind or make changes to anything dealing with money. So the problem is it's not being run technically by the person you think. So what happens is they send out this invoice, or they hijack even a previous conversation that may be occurring between the account they've compromised and the other target, in this case, their secondary target. And that attacker could even update things like a signature. So they could change your phone number. They could even put rules in your email account. So that way, when the secondary target replies or tries to call because, hey, this is weird, you're trying to change your banking information, they're calling the number in the signature, and that's going to the attacker. Or when they send an email back, the attackers put a rule in place in your inbox that hides that message. So you might not even know your account has been compromised, and there may be a new folder. And that's often something we look for when we're doing an investigation, is often we find secondary folders created in somebody's email mailbox that they didn't know about. And inside of it, we'll often find communication between somebody, often dealing with money changes, wire transfers, and that sort of thing. So I want to do a quick poll. I'll ask Yinting to help out with this one. So criminals are really getting creative in the way that they attack us today. They're pretty smart. And so what I'd like to do is just to see how familiar everybody is with phishing. Maybe if you've been impacted by phishing in some way, if your company has, if you've suffered damages, or if you were able to avert that and get away. Love to just see kind of what your thoughts are on that and how familiar everybody is. So take a moment, you'll see that poll pop up on your screen. If you don't, you can usually get to it through the Zoom panel. We'll give everybody a second to fill that out. And we, of course, appreciate everybody's input here. So while everyone is finishing that up, I'm going to jump through to the next piece here. There we go. Okay, so a pretty nice plethora. So we have some people who are unfamiliar with the term, some people who've never experienced any phishing. That's a good thing. And then we have a couple of people who got phished, were able to get away from it, and then a few who actually had some damages or issues that followed. So appreciate that, and thanks for throwing that up. And appreciate everybody involved in that and giving us your feedback. So obviously we have a great group of people here. We have everybody from all the scales. So this is a great first step for those that aren't familiar, kind of learning what the terms are. And then for those of you who've been impacted, maybe this will give you a little bit of information for next time, how to avoid that, how to get away from it, and then potentially how to address some gaps that may be present. So phishing obviously remains a modern threat. Phishing, and again, for those who are not really familiar with it by definition, it's an illicit attempt to impersonate or mask someone's identity and then encourage a victim to perform some sort of action. That could be, again, opening a file, providing information, and usually comes through use of email, but not always. There are other methods, though, phishing that exist. This could be such as vishing. For those of you that are not familiar with that, kind of a funny term there, vishing, but it comes from the term voice phishing. So again, somebody calls you, they're trying to impersonate through the phone instead of via email, but again, it's all with the same intent again, and usually they've done their research. Something else that we've seen is we have this SMS phishing, and so sometimes it's called smishing. You may hear that, and actually this morning there was a really interesting article that was posted about smishing, which I haven't seen a whole lot of information about in the news, but this morning WhatsApp was actually found to be compromised, and so they were having some issues. Apparently a hacker group found a way to compromise WhatsApp on both Android and iPhone. We're able to infiltrate and actually take control of some people's devices. So there is an update out. So if you have WhatsApp after this call, go get that update on your phone. Definitely going to want to get that. So when we look at vishing or smishing, there are a couple of different ways that attackers will use those. So one of the big ones we've seen recently is with multi-factor authentication. And that's something that I think a lot of people think is bulletproof, because a lot of people have probably told you, use multi-factor authentication, it's bulletproof. And it really does improve your overall security standpoint. But what we've seen happen is attackers will compromise your credentials and then send you a message kind of letting you know in advance, hey, you're going to receive a multi-factor code soon. Please reply to this message with it. We just want to confirm your identity. Everything's safe in your account. And of course, that's usually fake. So just be on the lookout from that. Those MFA codes, they're only going to come to you. Your bank's never going to ask for those back. So we saw about an 80% of social engineering attacks were performed through phishing last year. And again, social engineering is where an attacker goes out, does the research, and then comes up with some way to manipulate you or encourage you or persuade you that they are somebody who they're probably not. And social engineering is a really common tactic that we see attackers use. It's an old one that has been used actually since the 90s, and it continues to be used again, and phishing has been around for about that long as well. So why I say it's a modern threat is we're seeing this new spin on it, where they're targeting different things like multi-factor, which is brand new, or they're also using incidences that are occurring in society. So like the hurricane right now, you might see messages come out, donate to Red Cross or somebody else, and just be careful who those messages are coming from and what websites they might be taking you to. The primary data we saw compromised through phishing were, of course, credentials. And there are other items that were in that list, like personal information, such as medical or financial records. But primarily, they're going after your credentials, because once they have credentials, they're able to get into other things, and that's really all they need. The national average shows about 2.5% of the time when phishing emails are sent, users will click on it. From a bad actor's perspective, that's not a bad rate when you really think about it, since they're sending out tens of thousands of messages at a time in these larger phishing campaigns. And then they may only be sending out, maybe 100 or less in a smaller spear phishing campaign towards a specific person or a company they've done research on. But that's still a fairly good click-through rate. If they can get 2 people at a company to click on a message, that may give them the end that they're looking for. And so again, it just highlights the importance of being able to pick out those messages and avoid them. So what we do know is phishing, of course, is dangerous. It's dangerous to businesses, it's dangerous to individuals. But the good news is that we are able to mitigate some of this risk. And the best tool to use against phishing and other social engineering attacks, honestly, it's a well-trained user base. So the fact that you're here today, again, for those of you who are completely unfamiliar, somewhere in between, this is a great place to start. Those of you who maybe have been have fallen for one of these in the past, this is also a good place for you to be. Continue learning and educating yourself, because there's always changes in technology. That's something that is a guarantee. It's always going to change. So at Blueline, the company that I work for, we started an effort in mid-2019 to help organizations prepare for phishing and other cyber threats. And we were already doing this before, but in 2019, we really refocused our stance on cybersecurity and put some serious effort, resources, and time and investment into a platform that works. And this came, of course, from a growing need from our clients that we were hearing about. Since we now have 2 full years, 2020 and 2021, and we're about to have that 3rd year under our belt soon, that we can kind of prepare and show you this data from, what we have found is a pretty incredible trend with our clients. So in 2021, we were able to get about 31% of our clients to open simulated malicious emails. That's a pretty high rate. And again, we talked about national average 2.5%. I'll get to that in a second. So essentially fake messages that were not harmful, because again, it was a training exercise. We were able to get those clients to open up those emails. In 2021, our quote unquote success rate was down to about 14%. That's that blue line. So we went from the 30% down to the 14%. Great movement. And again, this is just showing our clients are getting better at spotting those malicious emails. And that all came through them continuing to use things like the simulated attacks, the trainings that we send out, and then also attending events like this, just to get that extra education, because sometimes that hands-on is really going to be beneficial for you. In 2020, we were able to get about 8.5% of our clients to actually click through those simulated emails or malicious links. That means they're not just opening the message and viewing it, they're actually clicking on it, interacting with it, downloading a file, visiting a website. And of course, those are fake, albeit they are harmless, because again, this is an exercise and they're not real. We're just capturing that data and then helping to train. But it does kind of highlight a really important fact, again, that there's a fairly high rate of people who are falling for those. In 2021, we were actually able to get our success rate, I put that in quotes, success rate, of having people click through our fake emails down to 2.4%. So a little below the national average. And I expect that number to be even lower this year as we continue to get a really good trained user base at each of those clients that are taking part in this training. So training works. The proof for us is in those last couple of years of data, but it's not just from our team. We're also seeing a lot of insurance companies now are requiring that companies, before they get signed on with cyber insurance, are implementing things like simulated phishing attacks or regular annual trainings or even quarterly trainings in order to apply and be accepted into that cyber insurance program. So obviously, if they're using it, they're seeing success with it as well, because it's going to save them money. So good things to do. And again, we're glad that you're here learning today. What I'd like to do is take a look at some real life examples of smishing and phishing. We'll start with phishing because again, I think that's probably the one that most people are going to see the bulk of, but we'll also look at a smishing example. So this is an example that came through. This is real, of course, and I think this is an easy to spot scenario where this message comes through to email and you're pretty confident it's fake. And if you're not there and it's not easy for you, that's okay. That's why you're here. And again, we're glad that you're here. So why I say it's easy to spot out? Well, here's why. So first thing we want to look at is who is it from? So it comes from this help desk 02. That's kind of weird. I don't know anybody that uses that, not even Microsoft with these massive help desk teams. It just seems very odd. So that's kind of the first thing itself is you want to look at the name that it came from, of course, along with the email address. And then in number two, we're looking at, okay, who's this email from? Well, it's clearly not Microsoft as the message is implying. And if we don't know who that company is, we're not a part of it, then this is a very weird email to receive. And again, that should be probably enough at that point to say this is fake. But if it's not, that's okay, we have more. So there's also a disclaimer at the bottom, again, referencing a company that has nothing to do with Microsoft and nothing to do with the company the person is working for who received the message. So again, that just red flags kind of all over the place. And then lastly, there's a button that you can click on and it's a link. So what I would always recommend you do is hover, do not click on that link. But if you hover over it with your mouse, you're often going to see a display of what that link is, where it's going. And if we look in this case, it's going to this random website, bunch of random characters and numbers and letters, and you have no idea where this is actually taking you. If it were truly Microsoft, it would be Microsoft.com. And so in this case, again, we can fairly confidently say this is not real and we want to avoid this message. What we should do is just delete the message. There's no point in doing anything further. If you're a part of a team that submits these to an abuse, you have like an abuse email mailbox you can forward these to, feel free to do that. If you work with a technology team, you can also send it to them and they might be able to block these in the future. So this one is another example too. This one's a little bit harder to spot. And this is a real message that came through. And in this example, it came from a company and the recipient knows and works with. So this is somebody you would expect to communicate with. You expect emails from them. And in this case, this is nothing out of the ordinary for them to communicate, send files back and forth. So what we were able to do though is there are still some things we're able to spot and look at and to say these aren't right. So the recipient first off was not expecting a message, and that may seem kind of hard to know. But if you're working on a deal with somebody, a proposal, an RFP, or maybe you're in negotiations on a financial thing, you would probably know about it. In this case, this person had no clue what was going on. So this message came across as very odd, just in that regard that they weren't expecting it. The other thing we want to look at is the subject line. There's a lot of quotes. It's kind of weird as well. And to me, as a cybersecurity expert, I would look at it and say, that looks like it was automatically generated by a computer system, probably because it was. This was just a bulk email that was sent out to a bunch of people through a compromised account. So it was completely auto-generated. Also, when we are looking at the recipient address, they're just saying hi, and maybe that's abnormal. Again, this would be something you'd have to be have personal knowledge of with that specific person. Is that how they talk to you? So you do want to look at things like context in an email. And is that normal behavior for that person? If it's not, that may throw some red flags for you. We also see some odd capitalizations. And again, that may be normal for the person you're talking to. If it's not, then again, probably some red flags. In my head, again, I'm looking at this saying it was probably automatically generated. Those are they're blanks that a computer filled in. Again, we're also looking at the context. And so in this case, the message intent is kind of saying, I'm sending you a document, a proposal, and then it says, we look forward to receiving a quote. Maybe it's an RFP process, but again, it seems kind of contradictory, and that's often the case with these emails is they don't always quite make sense. And in this case, it just doesn't quite make sense. We also have a document that's attached. And if we hover over it again, we can see a link. Again, I always recommend hover over it. Don't click on it. Just hover over it first. So in this case, it is using a legitimate website that maybe some of you are familiar with, Canva. That's real. And so this one's a little harder to spot because it's a real website. And again, if that company uses it, it might be something that maybe clicked on normal. So best thing to do, contact that person, call them, but don't do it with the number that's in their signature. Use a number you know is good for that person. And in this case, it was fake. The person's mailbox was compromised. And thankfully, the person who received it did not do anything weird with this. They didn't reply. They didn't click on any links. They did the right thing. So again, this one's a little harder to spot, but hopefully that helps kind of point out some things you can keep an eye on in those emails. So another form, of course, of phishing is smishing. And again, SMS is where that comes from. I don't know if I reviewed that or not. So SMS is just kind of the old name. The short message service is what it's called. Most people don't know that. They just call it text messaging, and that's totally fine. But that's where we in technology get that term smishing from. It comes from SMS, short message service, phishing. So you can just call it text message phishing. That's totally fine too. So this was a message sent from a local area code phone number. It's addressing an employee by their first name. Signed in the text was the boss's name, the employee's boss. So one would think, hey, that's probably real. It's a local area code. They knew my name. It's signed as a person I know. It's my boss. But the alarm bells may start going off here since, one, you probably already have this person's phone number, and so it's a new phone number. That's kind of weird. In this one, there was no attached message. So there was no video, there was no link, there was no document or picture or anything attached that could hold some sort of virus or malware or anything in it. So it seems harmless. But when we really look at it, this is a quite often used tactic by bad actors, where they want you to go grab gift cards or prepaid cards or something like that, and they'll have you scratch off the back of it and the PIN number and send them a picture. And we see this all the time. And we've actually seen sometimes now in stores, they'll have signs up that, will have a reminder to people, hey, if somebody's asked you to buy a bunch of gift cards, double check and call them and that sort of thing, because it happens that frequently. So what we often see here is that, this person saying, hey, I'm in a meeting, I'm unavailable right now. Can you do this quick task for me? Can you help me out really fast? And they play in on the kindness of somebody, that this urgency, hey, I really need help. Will you help me? And most people are good. And so they're going to try to help that person out. But the moral of the story is, don't do that. Or if you do, maybe question it first and just make sure it's really coming from the person their device hasn't been compromised, the number is real. So just pay attention to little details like that. And always be okay with trying to reach back out if you can, especially if they're wanting you to purchase a bunch of stuff. Thousands of dollars worth of gift cards is what it usually is. Probably want to get maybe some confirmation from HR that they're going to reimburse you for that before you use your personal card there. So I want to change gears just briefly. I want to talk about systems intrusions and malware, because business email compromise isn't the only method that's used. So we often see that business email compromise may lead to a system intrusion, and that's kind of the jump off point. So it's important to also address this system intrusion, which is that second part we kind of talked about, where the malware gets installed on your computer, or maybe it's ransomware. In this case, malware could allow an attacker to intrude a specific device. It could allow them to get on an entire network, and it may even give them access to your computer, what you're typing, what you're viewing, and we call that a keylogger, where they can actually look at the exact keystrokes you're punching into your keyboard. So even though it may be masked on your screen because you're typing in a password, they can see it very plainly and in clear text, and allow them to then compromise additional logins for maybe your bank or for email or for anything else that you may be logging into. So what we want to do here, let me bring this back up. There we go. So systems intrusions were primarily carried out through malware, which makes sense. That's how people are getting on your systems. They're installing a piece of malware on there, and then they're gaining access through remote access. They're deleting your data, they're compromising your data, they're doing ransomware. And so again, to kind of give you that order of operations, phishing email comes to you. Some link or file is there, and if you click on it, it's downloading some piece of malware onto your computer. And then at that point, your system has become compromised. Usually from that point, it then can spread. And that again is where they're going to get your credentials to your email account. They're going to try to spread to other devices on your network, or maybe your file shares in your business. And that's where those ransomwares occur, where the files get locked, and then all of a sudden, everybody's files are impacted because of one device. So while malware holds the bulk of system intrusion market, hacking was also used. It's kind of less frequently now. So we hear the term hacking a lot, hackers and hacking and all this, but it's actually pretty uncommon that hackers are involved. The reason for that is it requires a really high skill set. So it's much easier for me to send out a bunch of fake messages that look real, that have a link that download this piece of malware and compromise your system than for me to actually try to hack your computer. It's much harder to do that. So it still happens. It's usually very targeted. But again, malware is typically that primary method they're accessing your device. 95% of the time, this was of course as of 2021, financial motivation was the reason for the attack. We did also see espionage was on the list, and most of you here may not be dealing with espionage, hopefully, but that was the second most common. And usually, again, that's government contractors and other things like that. But it does happen. Most often, criminals are making out again with that personal information. They're looking for credit cards. They're looking for payment data. Sometimes medical records and other things like that. Usually they're using it to then resell it on the dark web, or they're using it to hold a ransom of some kind and saying, hey, I know intimate details about you, but if you pay me, I'll delete it and I'll forget all of it. But don't believe that. Over 25% of reported incidents actually led to disclosure of proprietary data. That could include private or otherwise just confidential information. And then over the past 4 years, we've seen a pretty significant increase in ransomware use, around a 4-fold increase. And ransomware is often through malware, it comes through malware, but by simple definition, it encrypts or holds data or locks files up and then requests some sort of payment for that information to be released back to the rightful owner. Again, we look at things like Colonial Pipeline, JBS Foods, and other things where they get ransomed, all their data gets locked, their computers get locked, and they can't do anything unless they pay this crazy amount of money in the hundreds of thousands or millions, usually through cryptocurrency, in order to gain access back to that data. So what are businesses doing to protect equipment and data? So we help implement a handful of solutions, and we always recommend a layered defense model. And again, you don't have to memorize any of these by any means, but this is just a solutions list that we'll often recommend. And the specific recommendations, and again, this is it's going to be very specific to a business. You're really going to want to partner with somebody who's going to be able to come in and assess that situation, see what kind of information you have, what type of infrastructure you have, and then kind of address individually what specific solutions are going to be best for you. And the reason there's so many of them is, again, we use that layered defense, also referred to as defense in depth by the government, and it's like an onion. You have different layers, and so you want to be able to peel different layers, and if one of them fails, there's still another layer that's going to protect your business. And so that's why there's so many different solutions that are out there today. But again, you want to find a good partner who's going to help you make sure you get the right solutions in place for your business. So we mentioned previously a trained user base is one of the most effective ways to mitigate cyber risk. And we're really glad that everybody has joined us here today to help spot these fake malware messages that we looked at through phishing and through smishing. But we also wanted to give you a couple things that you can do to kind of stay safe while you're working, either at home, in the office. And so we used to say that, use really long and complex passwords and change them all the time. That's the best thing that you can do. It's not anymore. So we don't recommend that anymore. It's very different. We still recommend that you use a complex password, usually 12 characters or longer. But we also recommend that you use that multi-factor authentication. So it may also be referred to as two-step or two-factor. They're very similar in the way that they are presented to the public. They're different in my world, but if you see any of those options, 2FA, MFA, definitely activate those. And they're always going to be available from banks. Most other companies now have added them in, even your CRM products, your email, they're always going to have that multi-factor. Definitely activate that. Currently, to date, it is unmatched in the amount of security that it provides to you compared to any other technology out there. So definitely recommend activate multi-factor. That is the best thing that you can do today. But in addition, also try to avoid clicking on links that are sent via email. Again, use that hover over. That's a great option just to kind of take a peek and see if that's something that you do or don't want to click on. You can also send those off. Again, if you're working with a partner, you can send those emails, maybe that are questionable, off to a partner to have them assess it for you, or maybe you have a person in your company that you kind of your go-to technology expert. You definitely want to have that just to help decipher which one's real and which one's fake. And there is a time and a place for everything. So there are going to be emails that you get where you're going to want to click on the links, especially if you're using a spam filter system that maybe sends out daily digest. But even those, you want to be sure, just hover over and make sure it's real because those are often things that attackers will target and then try to manipulate or send you a fake one that looks similar and trick you. So they're always going to work on your your speed. So when you're trying to leave for the day, they'll slip one in. Just keep an eye on that. And again, hover over that link is always the best thing you can do. Another really good recommendation is to get rid of obsolete systems. I can't tell you how many times myself, when we go in to do assessments for businesses, we find really old systems that are still plugged in, working, whether at home or in the office. And really, they're so easy to compromise from an attacker's standpoint. It's such an easy in to your business or your home. So definitely want to get rid of those systems if you can. Obviously, if you're working for a business and you don't have authorization to do that, double check with your IT manager, your director, your whoever's in charge first. But those are certainly low-hanging fruits we want to get rid of. And then also, again, as we've kind of talked about, find that trusted security partner. Aparo has some great resources that they work with and other local businesses here to help you. And so I would definitely recommend get in touch and find that partner, somebody that can really help look at your situation and help you find out what's best to mitigate that risk for your company and for your team. And then lastly, never stop learning. So I'm a big proponent for that. So again, we're glad you're here learning a little bit more, and hopefully that's this presentation has been helpful to you to find a couple of little tidbits or tips and tricks for you to avoid those phishing emails, avoid those smishing messages, and hopefully have a better security stance for yourself and for your business. So with that, I'm done, but I do have some Q&A, of course, so I want to help out and answer. I'll do my best to answer any questions that you all may have. And if you stump me, or if I just want to double check on something, we'll try to get your information from Yinting, and then we'll get back in touch just to make sure you get that answer. I want to make sure you get it. So again, thank you all so much for your time, for joining, and I would gladly take questions now. So while you are typing in here, I'm going to go ahead and start answering these, and hopefully Yinting can help me stay on track here. But we did have some great questions from you all, and we certainly appreciate those. So how to mitigate risk in the area of email security, phishing attacks, ransomware? Lots of ways for me to answer this, but it really begins with an audit of your specific environment, locate those areas of weakness, and then prioritize the critical risk sectors first. So we always will create a list. We use a methodology where we kind of assign a number value of some kind to different areas, and then we'll address those high priority, those critical areas first, and then kind of work our way back down. So that's kind of how I'd recommend mitigate risk. First, you need to figure out what your risk is, and then assess those and address those important ones first. So the question is, how would you prioritize the importance of which solutions to implement and address email security? So email security is a multi-layered solution, and it begins with your DNS. That means your domain name system, and you don't need to remember that either. But that's where it really begins, your email security. So something that you may manage in-house. You might have a web services provider that helps you, maybe an IT vendor. But there are some free solutions that you can actually implement with those providers through DNS, such as SPF, which is Sender Policy Framework, or DKIM, which is a Domain Keys Identified Mail. These are standard solutions that are available. They're widely accepted, and they're free to implement, and they help with different areas. So SPF helps with emails being, depending on which side of the scale, I guess you're looking at, being sent or received. And same thing with DKIM, it does the opposite. So it authorizes those emails when they're leaving your business so that the recipient knows they're real messages from you. And those are great solutions to use, but also robust spam filter systems and with customizable security policies. And that would really be your next layer of defense. And then followed up, well-trained staff. I'll keep saying that a well-trained staff is really important.
We had a question about the WhatsApp, which I think you mentioned earlier, but the question has been seen, WhatsApp is outdated on my phone. How should I respond?
Yes, so WhatsApp did put an update out late last night, I believe, to address the vulnerability that was found. So definitely, if you see that update, as long as it's coming through, a legitimate source, Apple, or Google Play, I go ahead and run that update. It's definitely going to be good. It just patches a vulnerability. So your phone may not be compromised, WhatsApp may not be compromised, but they did find that there was a vulnerability that was being actively exploited by a hacker group. And so they've pushed that update out for everybody to receive, thankfully. And so definitely would recommend get that update as soon as you can on your phone. Another good question, I'd love some guidance on providing our staff steer clear of phishing emails. So attend the training would be my response, such as this one, and question those emails, especially those with attachments or links, anything requesting, time sensitive or confidential information. Throw that red flag up, review it again, and just really take your time reading over it, scrutinize it, would be my best recommendation there.
And how frequently would you recommend training staff?
So this is a good question, and kind of somewhere, we address the how often do you change your passwords? And we used to say every 45 days, and then it was like, well, maybe every 90 days, maybe once a year. And now we're like, don't worry about changing your password, just use multi-factor. And so it's a developing area, it's going to change as well. But I would say for right now, training your staff at least twice a year, I think is really important. And the more frequently that you can run those trainings to help your team recognize fake emails, what's currently going on in the world, I think the better response you're going to get, the more risk you're going to mitigate. But yeah, twice a year, kind of ideal. I think a lot of businesses and cyber insurance providers are saying at least annually, but I think biannually is kind of the standard currently, but we'll expect that to probably change too. So how do you stop or minimize spam? And what's some of the right wording to speak to IT? That's great. So I don't expect that all of you or some of you maybe even are super technically savvy, and that's totally fine. That's why you're here, and we're glad that you are. So one of the big things is, how do you communicate with your techie people? And we use different lingo, and I'm sure I've used some abbreviations today that are probably like, I don't understand, and that's okay. So when we look at just kind of loosely defining, spam is junk mail, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. It's unwanted by the recipient. Phishing is junk mail as well, but it's masked to look real, or comes from a compromised sender, often somebody you know. So phishing is junk mail, but it just looks real, and then spam is just absolute junk mail that you don't want at all. In order to stop spam or phishing attempts, it really starts with your email provider. So that's a good place to start. Like we talked about, implementing those free solutions like SPF and DKIM, but also using a good spam filter, and having customizable policies from your spam provider and from your email service are really important as well. Again, things like multi-factor authentication to secure the account, spam filter to help kind of cut down on some of that junk that's coming in, and then it also may help pick up on some of those phishing attempts. Someone also had a question about Microsoft, and the question was, Microsoft's two-factor was hacked. What are you supposed to do with that? And I believe this is in reference to the hacker group APT29, Cozy Bear is who their code name is. They were able to exploit Microsoft's multi-factor authentication, but they didn't actually compromise it. So what they did is they intercepted the enrollment process and compromised unsecured accounts. So basically, when you first join with Microsoft email, or if you've already been on Microsoft email and decide to activate multi-factor, generally you have a window of enrollment. And usually most companies will set weeks, months for that enrollment period to be open, where people can actually log in without multi-factor to activate their multi-factor account. And that's what was compromised. So the attackers were essentially able to find accounts that were not registered or enrolled yet in multi-factor, and then set up their own multi-factor and then lock out the real user from being able to log in. So thankfully the actual multi-factor wasn't compromised. It was just kind of the method that we roll it out to new users. So how do you avoid that? That's a tough one, but I would say fast deployments. Obviously, you have to take your time with some companies, and especially the larger ones. But just be sure that when you're rolling out multi-factor, if it's your first time, work with a trusted provider to set a time frame around when that has to be done by. And you can also work with your provider to do scans of your current employees and figure out if any of them have compromised passwords. And that's what the hacker group was doing. They were finding people with compromised passwords and then taking over their account. So if you do that scan before, you can tell those people to change their password and then deploy it with a little more peace of mind. Is it best practice to pay or refuse payment in a ransomware attack? That's a good question for your attorney. However, I will say a law was passed in 2020 that does make paying a ransom illegal in most cases. So I would probably say don't pay it, but work with your attorney. But do be aware it is illegal in most cases now. Have somebody new to the world of cybersecurity. So that's awesome. Yeah, welcome and best of luck on the journey. Events like this are a great way to kind of get your feet wet, learn a little bit about what's going on in the industry. Doing those trainings and even YouTube videos and wherever else you can find that information. There are tons of cybersecurity news resources you can follow that provide great information, like the one I follow where I got the WhatsApp was compromised this morning from. So you can find nice podcasts you can get a part of, and they'll help keep you up to date on everything that's going on, because it is a lot to keep track of. We have another, we were hacked in 2021. It was through business email, and wow, yeah, so it's great that you're here as well, and hopefully learning a little bit about ways to combat phishing attempts and preparing for the next attempts, because there will be more. That's a horrible thing to have to go through. And as somebody who's worked with hundreds of businesses that have gone through that, it's devastating to some and business ending to others. So being able to kind of quickly identify that, oops, I made a mistake, and reach out for help. I think that's the important thing. We see a lot of people kind of, I didn't mean to click on it, and I don't see anything happening to my computer, and so I'll just pretend like it didn't happen. But you always want to, take safety first. So if you click on something, I won't be mad at you if you reach out and say help, and we come look at it and hey, everything's fine, nothing happened. I'd much rather say that than no one reach out and a week later, all of a sudden, all your files are encrypted. So yeah, hard thing to go through, but we're glad you're here and you're learning and kind of investing back in yourself and your business. We had another question that was asked: what are the best tools to incorporate for email and spam? I'm not a salesperson. I do have a bunch of solutions in my pocket that I can tell you about, but it really depends on your business. So I'd say, again, work with your trusted partner and try to figure out what's best for your specific needs. And that's going to vary, especially if you kind of feeds into the next question with secured email and different secure email platforms. So the solution you implement kind of depends on what you need out of it. And that includes things like spam filters, customizable policies, data leakage policies, and then also addresses your secure email. So the next question is, what programs or platforms are used for secure email? Do they have confirmations or delivery or fail notifications? Again, I don't want to sell you on a specific solution, but there are absolutely platforms that are out there that will do encryption for you. They will 100% notify you if the message has been delivered. Most often, you'll also get a read receipt. So when the recipient opens it, you'll know that the message has been opened. And then if it does fail, you'll definitely be notified that the message could not be delivered successfully. What I would recommend in terms of secure email is look up clientless encryption. Clientless encryption platforms are fairly new. They've been around for probably 3-4 years now, I'd say, maybe a little more, compared to traditional encryption, which has been around forever. And clientless encryption just means that it's a platform that doesn't have to be installed. So if you're using, like myself and probably many of you, you work on your laptop, you work in the office on a desktop, you work on your phone, maybe your tablet. That's a lot of devices to try to install software on and keep track of. So clientless encryption means you can access it from anywhere, whether it's through a website or through your standard email without having to install any additional programs. So that's a great tool to use. So look up clientless encryption platforms. That's a good one to use. And we have kind of addressed this earlier. So the question was, when a phishing attack has been identified, what are the steps that should be taken to update staff on how to proceed? So I might address this in two ways. Once a phishing attack is identified, the team should be notified immediately, letting them know this specific message is fake, and here's how we determined it to be fake. So that's kind of a learning point to your staff, and then also letting them know, hey, if you see this, don't click on it. We know it's fake because somebody else was either hit with it, fell for it, or just noticed that it came out. While not all staff may read past that last part, they might just say, hey, it's fake, and just delete. They won't even look at the details that you included. That's okay. Just including those in addition will kind of help train some of the staff that are reading those, and then at least those people who aren't reading the message but still see it will delete it. And so that may save you a little bit of time in the long run. As far as handling these specific messages, just notify your technology department or your provider, or whoever your point person may be at your company, and they can help kind of coach you on those next steps, whether that's delete the message, again, send it to your abuse team who's going to be able to look at that and see what they need to do to address those in the future to stop them from coming, or using it as a learning tool for your staff as well. I think that's all the ones I see here, but welcome any other questions if you have any.
I think that's it. Thank you so much, Tim. That was an amazing presentation. I definitely picked up on a few new things. Scared to open my email sometimes, but I guess that's good. Take a pause before you open your emails, download any documents. It's always a good reminder to do that. So I really appreciate you being here. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. I will be sending up that follow-up email. The slide deck will be included in there as well. And that's it for this series. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.